Hello. Hello, bonjour. Je suis Megan Ho et je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la Galerie d'Art d'Ottawa. Merci d'être venu prendre le thé avec nous. My name is Megan Ho, and on behalf of the Ottawa Art Gallery, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us on this snowy afternoon for Art and Tea at the OAG. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Ottawa Art Gallery operates on the beautiful Anishinaabe Aki. The Anishinaabe have been on this territory, known today as the City of Ottawa, since the beginning of time. All sorts of art forms have been and will continue to be a part of the vibrant Anishinaabe culture. Please note the presentation portion of the talk today will be recorded and kept for future access. Please make yourself comfortable, and of course, help yourself to tea and refreshments, which can be found on each table, as well as at the back of the room. We would also like to mention that we are conducting a raffle draw for a chance to win a gift basket of Firestone collection-related items from the OAG shop today. The draw is free to enter and will be held at the end of the program. All are welcome to participate. If you haven't already entered your name, please feel free to do so just at the table by the doors at the back of the room. The OAG shop will also be open until 6 p.m. this evening, where Firestone mugs and posters will be 25% off. There, you can also find more art-related products, as well as copies of Vanguard of the New Age, whose author, Gillian McCann, is one of our speakers today. And finally, before we dive into our program, I would also like to take a moment to thank the OAG's core funders, le Ville d'Ottawa, les Conseils des Arts du Canada, and the Ontario Arts Council. We would also like to take a moment to especially thank Chartwell, who is a sponsor for today's program. So let's dive right in. Thank you again for being here for our annual Firestone Chat. The Firestone Collection of Canadian Art, or FCCA for short, is a significant collection that was established by the Firestone family in the 1950s and includes over 1,600 pieces from various styles, regions, and time periods. Donated to the Ontario Heritage Foundation in 1972, and later transferred to the City of Ottawa in 1992, the collection is now cared for by the OAG and displayed in rotating exhibitions. Visions and Views, our current exhibition in the Firestone Gallery, is an exhibition focused on the two largest themes that are represented within the collection, landscape and abstraction. Within this context, we are also delighted to be presenting the work of Rachel Kalpana JAMES and her contemporary installation, Bright Oriental Star, which speaks to an ongoing practice of fostering contemporary dialogue to address gaps in the collection and highlight overlooked narratives. Now on view in the gallery, on level 2 until June, Rachel's work invites us to question how history is perceived and how ideas are exchanged by examining links to the Group of Seven and the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. Today, we will hear more about this work on view and its context in conversation with artist Rachel Kalpana JAMES, Dr. Gillian McCann from Nipissing University, and OAG's Director and CEO, Alexandra Badzak. The program this afternoon will last for approximately 1 hour. We'll start off with a bit about our speakers, followed by a look into the ideas of theosophy, historical context, and learn more about Tagore, followed by a closer look at Rachel's practice, her work within the exhibition, and links to the Group of Seven. Afterwards, there will also be an opportunity for audience Q&A. So thank you again for being here, and it is my pleasure to hand over the stage to OAG's director, Alex.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand this over to you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you again for coming out on this very blistery Canadian day. I think it's a testament to Canadians that we're all around the table here, so I really do hope that you just relax. Feel free to get up and get more tea and coffee and snacks as you feel. This is really, I think, a privilege to be able to sink in and just talk about art on a wintry day like today. And a very particular conversation around art, really how art has been a powerful vehicle, I think, for bringing new thoughts, new ideas together in a very interesting way. Again, the Firestone Chat has allowed us to sink into particular works within this collection. And every year we like to have a chat about this and really dig into, I guess, exploring works that come in dialogue with the collection, inviting all of you, I think, to consider new ideas in line with our contribution and our commitment at the Ottawa Art Gallery to art education. So really fostering a sense of curiosity, learning, and of course to continue our big love of art. And I think that's especially fitting for our chat today. Art education, I think, was a fairly huge interest with the members of the group of 7 and to the poet Tagore, whose connections we'll be exploring throughout this talk today. So, to the both of you, thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel and Gillian. I would like you to, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about yourselves, how you came to be interested in the topics that we're exploring today, and then really how did you get to know each other?
Okay, let me see how this works. There we go. First of all, thank you, Alex. It's such a pleasure to be here, and to Megan, who's the curator of the Firestone exhibition that's on right now. And thank you for having Gillian and I come here for the talk, as well as for the OAG for purchasing Bright Oriental Star and for exhibiting it until June of this year. So Jill and I have been, in preparation for this talk, we've been talking about like how we met in the 90s in Toronto, and it was a really special time for us. I came to Toronto to study at the Ontario College of Art, and Jill was studying at the University of Toronto. And we were very, very lucky to be part of what I think was a synergy of movements. And in this slide that you can see right here, we were involved in anti-racist movements, feminist movements. I worked for a theater company, Company of Sirens, and we did education in the schools, taking theater to the schools. Jill and I both contributed to Diva magazine, which was also a feminist magazine of South Asian artists and writers. And let me think now if this is forward. Okay. And at the same time, in the 90s in Toronto, there was many, many publications, magazines, which are obviously dwindling today, but they provided a really critical place for discussion on art and politics. So politics, social justice was really important to us. And these magazines were not only local, they were national across Canada. And also I have in there Art India, because we also were having an international presence at that time. This context, the reason we're talking about this context is we feel it somehow connects to the context in which the group of 7 was working, where many things were coming together that influenced them, their ideas and their approach to their art practice. Now, because of this, sorry, I have a bit of a cold. So because of this context, for me, art expression became a really important tool for addressing the significant issues of the day as a way for us to understand not only ourselves, but the society in which we work in. And what was also happening was there were many different platforms, like artist-run centers like A-Space, and just like Gallery 101 here in Ottawa. And these artist-run centers were really important for communities, artists as communities, to come together and create works and things. So here's my first exhibition was in 1993 with A-Space, and it was in partnership with the Asian American Arts Network called Godzilla. And these platforms, artist-run centers, were really important in terms of it gave a way for us to also create our own organizations. So just like the group of 7, which Jill will be speaking about as well, one of the amazing organizations that started in the 90s was Desh Pradesh, and it was a festival and conference of South Asian cultures, politics, and arts in the West. And it was local and international, and it was interdisciplinary. So we were meeting dancers, people in literature, film and video, visual art, theater. It was just, and it was very progressive. So these were progressive spaces for artists of, for us, the South Asian community and beyond, because so many other communities felt it was a really great place for them to participate in. And it was lesbian and gay, it was anti-communal, it was feminist, so there was just wonderful, wonderful places for discussions and art making. And through Desh Pradesh, I was able to, with many other artists, create an artist-run center called SAVAC, the South Asian Visual Arts Collective. And I have to say, of many of these organizations started in that day, SAVAC is still a going concern. And it supported South Asian artists who were working in contemporary visual art, giving them opportunities for access and full participation in the arts community. So it was through this kind of background that Jill and I were sort of, working separately and together. And this next slide shows have Jill talk about it.
Yeah, as part of the conversation, I was trying to remember how I met Rachel, and I honestly can't remember because it was so organic. I don't have a meet cute story, I'm sorry. We were sort of running in the same circles. So this is just one example of when we first met. So I had been, I was co-organizing an international literary conference at U of T on South Asian literature, and I don't know if you can tell, but that's Rachel. She very generously offered to be our model, and she sat in a rickshaw on Gerrard Street, and it was fantastic. So yeah, I think it was the water we were swimming in was all of these different activities in Toronto at that time.
And that led to other opportunities. Jill and I were both in Rights on Real, which was like a human rights festival, and we did that for a couple of years. And then through SAVAC, the South Asian Visual Arts Collective, Jill proposed this program called Transforming the Guru.
Yeah, so this one was dance and academics and art, and you brought in the show, right?
Yes, and then we also had an exhibition of miniature painters. So this was just, you can just tell we were active, we were socially involved, we were constantly collaborating, and arts education was very much part of it.
That's really, it's really, really interesting to hear how your stories wove together, how your histories wove together, the exchanges, artistic and arts activism, arts education. It's interesting how there's these sort of moments, these sort of pockets of great exchange that seem to happen that influence and create amazing things like SAVAC. And, Rachel, so wow, that, it's still running today, and it's such an honor to have you here. Well, both of you here, because I think we also want to bring that energy that was going on at that time and relate it to the Group of Seven and Tagore and to a moment in time in Canadian art history that seemed to also be ripe with interdisciplinary thinking, with intersections between Eastern and Western philosophies, and what that might have produced ultimately, how that may have influenced. I mean, we certainly know that the Group of Seven were influenced by a number of sources, and several of them were interested in aspects of theosophy and trying to find the divine in nature. So Gillian, maybe you can tell us a little bit then, as we weave back into the art historical piece of this, talk a little bit about theosophy and the Group of Seven and where Tagore kind of fits into all of that.
Okay, so before Jill speaks, we have a slide here that is introducing you in broad strokes to Rabindranath Tagore, and I was going to read it, but I can't see it very well from here, but renowned Indian poet, writer, musician, visual artist, philosopher, educator, and social reformer, a polymath. And he won the Nobel Prize in 1930 for his literature, Gitanjali, his collection of poems. And the next slide, hopefully you can have read his influence, his themes of spirituality, Indian spirituality, themes of nature, and humanity's eternal bond with the divine to a global audience. He was able to convey that. And the next slide is an introduction to the group of seven. When we speak about the influence on the group of seven, we're speaking in broad strokes. We're not saying that any connections that we're making were to all of them. It's specifically perhaps Arthur Lismer, Lauren Harris, and Frederick Varley. So I'll just leave that on, and then Jill, you can go ahead. Thanks.
Hi, I just wanted to thank the OAG and particularly Megan Ho and Alex Badzak for the invitation to speak at the gallery. I was on a very wintry Sunday, Ottawa, way to go, hardcore. I was actually here for the opening, so I'm really happy to be back. And I have to say that I think there's never been a more pressing need for public spaces like this if we're to grapple with the issues that are challenging us right now. I wanted to begin with a 2012 quotation by writer and journalist Philip Marchand, who wrote, "The arts have a need for the otherworldly in the same way that plants need moisture. This idea flies in the face of usual histories of contemporary art that often style it as purely secular, a purely secular modern movement. However, the art world is increasingly recognizing the role of spirituality in art, and so there was a kind of a watershed exhibition in LA in 1985 called The Spiritual in Art Abstract Painting, and then there's been an ongoing project that I actually participated in Amsterdam called Enchanted Modernities that were looking at different artists and the influence of spirituality. So this recognition of the influence of the spiritual on art has been borne out in my work on theosophy in Canada. So very early in my research, I realized that the theosophical movement was extremely attractive to artists and to creative people. Part of the appeal was the focus on the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism, which would have been very new to many living in 20th century Canada. So for me, this subject links to a larger interest of mine, which is much what we were talking about, what allows for thriving creative communities anywhere. And so as a result of preparing for this talk, Rachel and I have been reflecting on our shared experiences and what makes it so vibrant and inspiring, what kind of communities create art of that type. So over the years, I've been struck by the fact that many of the places I visited and took for granted were built by the commitment of those dedicated to creating a space for Canadian culture. Toronto Theosophists and their community were involved in building some of the most important artistic institutions in Canada, including the AGO, the ROM, and Hart House. Unfortunately, this aspect of their history often gets lost, and I think it's very important to really bring back to center stage that the group of seven were dedicated beyond their own career success. They wanted to help other artists, they wanted to build institutions, they wanted to mentor younger artists. Before I go any further in tracing the connections between Theosophy, the group of seven, and Rabindranath Tagore, I want to start with just a very short description of Theosophy, because I realize most people have not heard of it. Then I'm going to move on to talking about the coming together of East and West, specifically in the work of Tagore. So, oh, you're already there, okay. The giant photo of Helena Blavatsky. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was the founder of the International Theosophical Society. She was its primary ideologue, and Blavatsky could take up a number of talks, and there's been a number of books written on her. She's a fascinating character, and her life is living proof of Byron's saying that fact is stranger than fiction. So for our purposes today, I think I just want to talk about just some of the key ideas of Theosophy. So we're just going to look at the motto here. I think it gives you a good sense. So this is the motto of the International Theosophical Society, and you see the motto is no religion is higher than truth. And so to my knowledge, the Theosophists were the first group in the Western world to teach that all religions are equal and that each religion possesses truth. And so they attracted a lot of radical people to them. And I just wanted to say that the emblem here shows the mixture of East and West and different occult symbols that often artists would also use as part of their kind of visual vocabulary. I just wanted to point out that used to be a swastika up there, but you're probably aware that that Hindu symbol got hijacked, so they've changed it slightly. And then above that, you probably recognize the Om symbol from Hinduism. So as a result of their religious and political openness, the Theosophical Society attracted many of the most radical people in Canada. The Toronto branch was founded in 1891 and immediately attracted open-minded people in the city from the field of the arts, healing arts, and politics. Shortly after the founding of the TTS, there were branches created in Ottawa, London, and Vancouver. Now, unfortunately, to my knowledge, I don't know of any work that's been done on that, so that is something that I would love to see happen in the future. So the founder of the Toronto Theosophical Society, Albert Smythe, was a journalist and a poet who was involved in the Irish literary renaissance before moving to Canada. And as I discuss at some length in my book, Vanguard of the New Age, the milieu in Ontario at this time could hardly have been worse for the creation of art. So I've included a quotation from a woman who said, "It's bad enough we have to live here. I don't want to have Canadian art on my walls." So unsurprisingly then, members of the group of seven are working in this very, hostile is maybe too strong a word, but it's not a very inspiring environment. So members such as particularly Lauren Harris and Arthur Lismer were attracted to Theosophy, which taught that each nation has, they called it its own dharma, or their own destiny. So Blavatsky also believed that North America had a particular contribution to making new art, new forms of art that would be separate from Europe. So this was very important to artists like Lauren Harris, for instance. From the theosophical point of view, the arts were viewed as being part of a larger spiritual impulse. This idea is expressed most clearly in the influential work of theosophist Vasily Kandinsky in his book Concerning the Spiritual in Art. Now, this book has been somewhat lost to history, but it's absolutely fantastic. So this book was published in 1912 and would have had a direct impact on the group of seven and their development of what has been referred to as mystical aesthetics. Kandinsky wrote about the importance of spirituality as an inspiration for art and on color theory. An echo of Kandinsky can be heard in a quotation from Arthur Lismer, who became a vice principal at the Ontario College of Art, who wrote, "Art moves in close partnership with religion," unquote. Lauren Harris also was influenced by theosophists like Annie Besant, whose book Thought Forms gave spiritual meaning to color. These theories and his own spiritual journey would lead him into purely abstract painting over time, as I think some of you probably already know. So Harris also organized an exhibition of painters such as Piet Mondrian and Vasily Kandinsky at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 1927. So mutual influence and inspiration are central to this narrative. Many of the founding members of the group of seven belonged to both the Arts and Letters Club and the Toronto Theosophical Society, and they were builders and joiners. And joiners is a kind of Victorian word for people who join all sorts of clubs and are participating. So they were participating in all sorts of groups at the time. And this points to another idea Rachel and I have been discussing, that art is often nurtured through personal relationship and in the context of community. To give an example, the Arts and Letters Club mounted performances of Irish writer Synge's Riders to the Sea in 1911. And we just came across this as last minute at the Ontario Archive, had a photo. They are indeed in blackface, and they have like a warning here. But this is a production of The Post Office by Rabindranath Tagore that was put on in 1914. This would be at a time when theater was barely in existence in Toronto. So these performances called on the talents of members who were directors, painters, stage managers, and I believe this is the first performance of Tagore in Canada. So the connection between theater and theosophy in Canada is only now being researched. There's an excellent critical edition by Scott Duchesne on creative theater that was published by the University of Ottawa Press in 2020, if you're interested in theater history. From this early stage, Rabindranath Tagore would have been viewed by many theosophists as what they would have called a fellow traveler, and his work was followed by with interest by the publications of the Society. Poets such as Yeats, who was also a theosophist, was aware of Tagore's poetry and his winning of the Nobel Prize in 1913. Theosophists were also aware that Tagore repudiated his knighthood in 1919 in protest against the Amritsar Jallianwala Bagh massacre. This was the same massacre that put Gandhi on the path of becoming the most important leader of the Indian independence movement. Tagore and the Theosophists were part of a larger conversation taking place about nationalism in the shadow of colonialism, with Theosophists involved in the independence movements in both Ireland and India. An example of this is Tagore's support of Theosophical President Annie Besant when she was placed under house arrest in India by the British for writing on Indian independence. The Theosophists were also aware of Tagore's commitment to education. In 1901, Tagore founded an experimental school in rural West Bengal that he called Shantiniketan, where he set out to nurture the best of Indian and Western traditions. Tagore visited the Theosophical Society headquarters in 1934, went on a fundraising tour for his school, and the Theosophists were interested in his work on education, also Maria Montessori. So these types of utopian communities and ideas were not uncommon at the time. And Theosophists still hold and own a huge property in what was Madras, now called Chennai. So in the United States, Theosophists founded a community called Point Loma, which was meant to be a shelter for artists against the constant demands of the money economy. And this is, again, something I think that gets lost about the Group of Seven, was that they were very concerned that art not just become an issue of money. And I find this one of the sort of sad ironies. I was giving a talk at the Arts and Letters Club recently, and I said, the fact that Lauren Harris's paintings are going for millions of dollars, I think is kind of a tragic irony, because he was very concerned that art not be a commodity, that it be something for the community. I want to turn now to focusing on theosophical connections with the quote-unquote East, which is, of course, a complex topic. I will say that I don't want to kind of sugarcoat this. Theosophical attitudes were a mixture of Orientalism, but also radical kind of cosmopolitan openness. So they were subject to all the same biases of their time. They're probably among the most open-minded at that time. So I will say Theosophists were among the first in Canada to talk about Indigenous spiritual traditions as equal to Christianity, and to take on both missionaries and the Canadian government on these issues. Albert Smythe wrote on this topic in the pages of the Canadian Theosophist, as he did on topics of wealth inequality and the need to fight fascism. The art critic Frederick Hauser wrote in 1923 that, quote, Aboriginal myth has to be a foundational part of inspiration for Canadian artists. So members of the Group of Seven, such as Arthur Lismer and Lauren Harris, both wrote for Theosophical publications and lectured at the TTS. They were interested also in the political realm, and so Theosophist Kartar Singh, a member of the TTS, who then moved to BC, was extremely active in defending the rights of citizenship for Indians living in BC. His work with others resulted in these communities being given the full rights of citizenship and addressing racist immigration policies, this was not completely accomplished until the mid-1960s. So Singh was one of the first organizers of Tagore's visit, one of the key organizers of Tagore's visit to Vancouver in 1929. During his visit, Tagore spoke to sold-out halls on human rights issues and on behalf of South Asians in Canada. The Canadian Theosophists reproduced an open letter to the Canadian people from Tagore, exhorting them to eradicate all inequalities, quote, between rich and poor, and also between different races of mankind. So I just want to conclude here by saying that Theosophy was inspiring to artists and encouraged experimentation. It was a key contributor to the rise of abstract art. And as I have said already, Theosophists were institution and community builders and part of dense international networks. This is something I've been thinking about as a result of all of this, Rachel and I talking with one another, that I think art always inspires art, so it's an ongoing conversation. So I think Rachel's work for me fits within that idea of this just, I don't know who said it, but it was like in an intelligent dialogue with the world, right? That her work is speaking, looking at the Group of Seven and then speaking back to it. And this doesn't have to be praise. It can be critique, it can be intention, but it's still this ongoing kind of dialogue. So I want to end with a quotation from Kandinsky and Lismer. Kandinsky wrote that literature, art, and music are the most sensitive spheres in which the spiritual revolution is felt. And Lismer stated in 1925, "It is necessary as Canadians that we should believe that we are capable of creating great art," unquote.
Thank you, Gillian. That was really, really interesting. I don't think I quite understood the depth of theosophy and its influence on some of the great kind of structures of artistic or creative power in Canada. I want to pull, before we go into Rachel's amazing work, I do want to just draw out a little bit more the influence of Tagore and the Group of Seven. Do we think there was a direct influence of Tagore on the Group of Seven?
I would say that they would have known of him, and they probably would have read Gitanjali, because that had won the Nobel Prize. But unfortunately, I can't make a direct line, because there's not enough work done on it. And again, this is when I regret not having grad students, but there needs to be more work done on it.
Right. And then to that piece of the connection between theosophy and nationalism, and because the Group of Seven is so tied to sort of this national identity in their work, sort of drawing out, sort of this essence of Canada. Can you just speak a little bit more about that?
This is very important to me, actually, because theosophists, including the members of the Group of Seven, their belief was that a nation should be judged by its arts, not by its military, not by its economy necessarily, but that great nations foster great art. So I would say that would have been their idea of nationalism.
That's, I think, helpful to sort of set it within its historical context and what was, the complexities of that. So this then is a nice segue, I think, as you were saying, Gillian, that art becomes a conduit for further conversations, right? And I think at the Ottawa Art Gallery, we've come to really understand that power and to try to foster it as much as possible. So, Rachel, your work explores this connection, obviously, the supposed or proposed influence of Tagore and the Group of Seven. What really drew you to that story?
Okay, thanks, Alex, for the question, and thank you, Jill, for giving such a good context in which we can understand the Group of Seven, the context in which they worked and they had their practice. And also, and I'm going to use my words very carefully, the possible threads that you drew between Rabindranath Tagore, the Group of Seven, and theosophy. So for me, I didn't have that kind of background when I was invited to be part of an exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario that SAVAC had put on in the year 2000 called Private Thoughts, Public Moments. The curator, Sutapa Biswas, wanted us to consider the art gallery as something that we owned, that it's a public institution, that we have, especially as artists, have a right to be there in the gallery. So her invitation to us was to go through the gallery and create an artwork in response to an artwork, the space, whatever. So it was only by chance that I came to make this connection between Tagore and theosophy. It's when I saw this particular painting by Frederick Varley, one of the Group of Seven, and it's called Portrait of Mrs. E. And the Canadian historical galleries tend to have a lot of landscapes, images of the Group of Seven with trees and rocks and plants and beautiful. And yeah, to me, they feel like it's Canadian identity, like this is the landscape that I see. And for some, it creates that sense of belonging. For others, that empty landscapes can represent an erasure of Indigenous peoples. That's one critique, and that the land is free for colonizers to exploit. For me, seeing this portrait in the gallery, I got a little tingling of sense of belonging, because when I saw this image of Mrs. E, I saw someone kind of sitting in a yogic pose with her legs crossed. The scarf around her neck was like an Indian dupatta. She had an expression on her face that was introspective, or perhaps otherworldly. She was somewhere else. And I kind of felt like there's a story behind this. I wonder if she has any connection with India. So I did some sleuthing in the archives, and I found that indeed, her name is Minnie Ethel Ellie, and she was interested in theosophy and Eastern religions. And the curator of the historical galleries at the time, Dennis Reed, he had written a book called The Concise History of Canadian Painting. So through reading some of his work around Varley, I found that Varley, in the year 1918, 5 years after Gitanjali was published and won the Nobel Prize, he had bought a copy. So he was quite familiar with Tagore. And I'm like, I didn't even know that Rabindranath Tagore was known to people in Canada at that time. So I was making this other connection. Here's Varley reading Tagore, reading Gitanjali. So, you know, I'm wondering, this is making me even feeling more like connected with these works. In the gallery as well was another portrait by Varley called Dharana. And also in Dennis Reed's book, I found that he mentioned that when Varley was in Vancouver in 1929, that he and his circle of friends who were other artists and gallerists who were interested in mysticism and theosophy assisted in bringing Tagore to Canada in 1929 when Tagore came to speak at the National Council for Education. So here's another connection. Like, to me, it's like, what is going on here? And as Jill was mentioning, Kartar Singh was also, with the Theosophy Society, had organized for Tagore to come. So this painting is painted in 1932, and that would have been after Varley had perhaps seen Tagore speak in Vancouver. So I just found for myself, it was through my own sort of digging, reading, and thinking about this, through the connection that I made with that first painting of Mrs. E. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to create an artwork in the Canadian Historical Galleries that somehow teased out that story for viewers to come and experience. So in the Canadian Historical Galleries, Mrs. E's portrait is opposite a group of drawers that host Group of 7 sketches, similar to the group of drawers that we have in the Firestone Gallery for A.Y. Jackson. So in that drawer, I decided that I would create an imagined portrait of Mrs. E, because I assumed that with her interest in theosophy and mysticism and things, that she would have been part of that circle with Varley, and they would have been discussing these things, and she would have come across Tagore. So I created a whole narrative that's sort of based on fact, but is basically fiction. And I used the display mechanisms of the museum to put it under glass in this drawer, and I created 3 diaries that I attributed to Mrs. E, in which she creates a narrative through each entry. The first narrative, and it has an article in here from the Globe at the time that talks about Tagore winning the Nobel Prize. And in this particular entry is about her reading Tagore, and I believe she writes the end part of the entry after reading Gitanjali. She says, a note was struck in my soul, not the difference, but the sameness, this love of God. The next entry in the diary, I imagine when she's sitting for Varley, and Varley actually says this, I read this in one of the books, so I attribute to her in her diary entry, that Varley is telling her, don't expect this to look like you, this portrait. So this idea that their representation, the way that they were approaching art was not representational. It was something beyond that. And the last diary talks about what I imagine is Mrs. E joining people like Varley and other group of 7 artists going to Vancouver to actually attend the lecture that Tagore gave. And in this, another quote I give to her that was actually attributed, I think, to a journalist, was that, and I'm going to have to read it because I can't remember it offhand here. Tagore is the first poet I have seen who combines the reality in the appearance. So sort of her reaction to his exotic appearance and him being an artist. So the intention behind creating these works in the museum/gallery is to intervene in sort of the stated historical and perspectives of the day that created what we call the Western canon in the way that we understand and interpret art. When we go to a gallery, any way that it's curated is a constructed way of understanding the work that we're seeing. And it's a way to encourage viewers when they go to a gallery to always be questioning, to look at something and to not only just look at the work in the way that a curator may have provided it to them, but for them to find sort of their own personal connections with the work. And through my artwork, perhaps get some clues and from looking at these diaries, which are fictional, but to somehow get something that, just like when I looked at the portrait of Mrs. E, that triggered something for me that gave me a sense of belonging. So that's how I came to make those initial connections between Tagore and the group of 7 and Theosophy.
I think it's so fascinating, first of all, just for you to bring up the word imagination. It's a word, sadly, I think, we don't use very often in the academic or art historical world, where, we certainly like to place work within a certain context that we've decided on. And I think your work really sort of exploded that and allowed for your artistic sort of vision to weave in between the known facts, to deliver a bit of a narrative that perhaps reveals more about the story than we could have possibly gotten from just art historical facts. And I think that's the role of artists, and it's wonderful that you could share your journey there and your process. So let's bring that then to the work at hand, the work that's in the Firestone Gallery, Bright Oriental Star. Tell us about how you got there.
Okay, so Bright Oriental Star, and I hope many of you have been able to see it in the Firestone Gallery because it's an installation, and we're going to show a little clip of it, of the video, but it's actually, I hope that you'll have that experience in the exhibition that's on now with my work there. And thank you so much again, OAG, for hosting it. So this work of Tagore and Mrs. E, that was what the work was called, of the diaries, was made in 2000. So almost 10 years later, I made Bright Oriental Star. And I had also moved, it coincided with my move here to Ottawa. And one of the things that struck me when I was doing my research on Tagore was how he was perceived by Canada in the newspaper reportage and also in the way that the Theosophists referred to him as the Bright Oriental Star. So what I wanted to do with this new work was to bring attention to these headlines, but also still imagine, I'm using that word again, imagine, because of the facts that we know, because as Jill was saying, we don't know if there was any connection between Tagore, the group of 7, but what I wanted to do is keep imagining that there was, and we just don't know about it. So I have the headlines. The Bright Oriental Star is a video installation that uses text and visuals that I believe are reminiscent of the group of 7. And what was I going to say? Yeah, so I wanted to imagine that this is Tagore walking through the Canadian landscapes when he came to visit in 1929. The headlines were taken from, I'm going to use a few choice ones here to give a little bit of the story. Now, I was going to read the text here, but I'm finding it difficult to read over here, oh no, I have it here as well. I can read it from here. So, in 1913, Tagore wins the Nobel Prize, and the Globe writes, "It's the first time that the Nobel Prize has gone to anyone who is not what we call white. It will take time, of course, for us to accommodate ourselves to the idea that anyone called Rabindranath Tagore should receive a World Prize for Literature. Have we not been told that the East and West shall not meet? The name has a curious sound. The first time we saw it in print, it did not seem real." So, despite the above skepticism of Canada's perception of Tagore, he received many invitations to come visit Canada. And but unfortunately, he declined because the next year after winning the Nobel Prize, in 1914, there was the incident of the Komagata Maru. And this is when about 374 British Indian subjects chartered a ship to flee from persecution in India and come to Canada to settle. But Canada's continuous journey policy was enacted, and after months of just being on the boat in the harbor, they had to return to India to dire and tragic circumstances. And the Toronto Star headline was, "Hindu Shuns Canada." Then finally, when Tagore did accept an invitation to Canada, and this was by the National Council of Education in 1929, as Jill was mentioning, he was invited by Kartar Singh, as well as Dennis Reed mentioned, assisted by Varley and his Vancouver circle. And thousands came to hear him speak, and a reporter for the Canadian Theosophist declared that Tagore was the bright Oriental Star of the occasion. So these are some of the headlines that I use in my work. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the beginning clip of Bright Oriental Star, and it starts with the first line of Tagore's Gitanjali. Do I press it again? Okay, so this is a clip, but it's a video of Bright Oriental Star. But Bright Oriental Star is an installation. It's a video projection on a chalked wall, and so this image is an image of that text on the chalked wall, and the video projection. I'm not quite sure what the height is. I think it's about 12 feet high, and I was trying to create with this work. For the viewers, an immersive walk through Canadian landscape and history. And through this sort of dialogue that you just saw, and I'm very interested to see what you thought of that small clip that you just saw, was when it's a dialogue or it's a call and response between the text, the flashing text, and the visuals. And what I was trying to create for, before I go on too much into the visuals, I just want to show you the next one. Backwards. This is a still from the video, and I just wanted to say that most of the the landscapes are empty, but this one has a teepee in it because this was, I wanted to reference Tagore's farewell address to the Canadian people. And like Jill was saying in his farewell address, talked about the equality of races and things like that. But he made a very important warning or a reminder to the Canadian people that in their cultural project that they respect and honor the Indigenous people of this land. So very much in 1929, bringing to the forefront those issues in art making and just in our general life. So the images, the video is a video projection, as I said, on a chalked wall. And what I'm trying to do is kind of riffing off something that the group of 7 artists, Lauren Harris, said was his artistic aim. And I'm just going to quote him. I'm going to read his quote. He said, "The aim is toward a pure creative expression, wherein the artist alters colors and by changing and reshaping forms, intensifies the austerity and beauty of formal relationships, and so creates a somewhat new world from the aspect of the world we commonly see." So I've just shown you right here, this is a comparison of Tom Thompson's work, and this one I think is called Northern Shore. I'm sorry, I can't read it. Well, maybe I can see it here, Northern Shore. And one of the images in my video to show how I am trying to riff off the imagery that we see in the group of 7. And in line with what Lauren Harris is saying, a lot of people ask me when they're looking at their work, they want to say, how did you get that effect? And I used a digital effect to alter the landscape, so I'm altering it. It looks kind of dark and not as beautiful and bright colors as the group of 7, but it is creating that sort of otherworldly, altered sort of imagery of the land. And what I did was I used a handheld camera, and one of the things that struck me when I moved to Ottawa was I was seeing those trees that looked like the jack pine. I was seeing those landscapes. So all the images in this video are taken, oops, wrong way. This was at, this one here is at the Arboretum. The first images that you saw in the clip was at Hogsback, and so all these nice little touchstones in Ottawa. But what I'm trying to do is create this sort of altered experience of the landscape, but trying to create, hopefully through the rhythm of the text in juxtaposition with the panning of the moving image over these landscapes, an experience for the viewer to have almost a immersive visual walk through the landscapes, and to also capture what the group of 7 were trying to do, sort of a spiritual experience. So whether that happens or not is for you to let me know. And just one more thing is the text. Wanted to talk about how and why I did the text as I did. So the headlines, they usually start off with the source of the headline. So this is the Globe, November 14, 1913. And what I do is I break down the actual headline into the individual words. And they come off sort of pulsing on the screen. And that can be interpreted however way you wish to. It could be interpreted as a news flash with a certain urgency. Could be interpreted as a pulse, like we heard at the beginning. There's a heartbeat pulse, the organic connection of us with the enlivened landscape. It could be just the rhythm of poetry, as we saw Tagore's Gitanjali's, the words, the first lines of Gitanjali. So the breaking down of the words has, with the visuals, creates many different things. But one of the things for me that I wanted to do was to sort of deconstruct those headlines so that the emphasis on the individual words would show the significance of how Tagore was perceived in the way that they would refer to him. They would refer to him as British, Indian, and then the other word is poet. And he wins Nobel Prize. Or they refer to him as Hindu, shuns, like that. Or they refer to him as Bright Oriental Star. So for anyone who's coming in and seeing this work without knowing the whole background, I'm hoping that just the words themselves, just like the diaries, are little clues that somehow pull you in and make you wonder and want to know more about the story behind these headlines. So in creating Bright Oriental Star, that's what I was trying to do in this sort of juxtaposition of text and visuals and Tagore and the Group of Seven.
It's such a great insight into not only the work itself, but your own practice and how you approach it, but this idea of really sort of embodying a moment, embodying what might be an imagined landscape of the Group of Seven, and bringing the spiritual, the political, the body into its realization. I want to flip into again your practice in this idea of that it oscillates between documentary and imagined, and blurring the lines between history and fiction. And can you speak a little bit more of how important ambiguity and uncertainty in the historical narrative really does factor into your work?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it is oblique. When you watch this piece, I know people may or may not understand what this narrative is, and then they'll go read the statement beside it. But I think that's what artists are doing. More than anything, we are trying to create, and I'm using actual facts of the day and the history that we know so far, to pose questions. So that's what it's doing by presenting it in this kind of fashion. Viewers, when they're seeing it, they have their own imagination. They have their own history behind them. They have their own biases in which they see the work. So I really believe that whenever we're looking at a work of art, we're always filling in the gaps. So we know that gaps always exist in history making or anything that is presented to us, knowledge, things like that, that we continue to question it. So that obliqueness is very much intentional.
Really, I think so pertinent, especially right now as we see so many of our institutions that we've come to sort of believe hold truth for us to some degree breaking down. But there is a space for the imagination within all of that. Now, your work right now within the Firestone exhibition sits in amongst the work of the Group of Seven. How important is that, or does that change the reading of the work? Does it necessarily have to be nestled amongst the group of work, much like the diaries? How important was the placement for you?
Well, I really want to thank Megan Ho for her vision in positioning this work in the Firestone Gallery with her exhibition, Visions and Views. This is the first time I've shown the work where it has been with Group of Seven surrounding it, so it's a really special opportunity and platform. It's really important because when you see it in any other spaces, you're really relying a lot on, well, maybe the work is supposed to be able to stand on its own, but the context makes it much more rich. So, for example, when you come into the Firestone Gallery, you're coming into usually a very quiet, sort of subdued space with the artwork on the walls, but all of a sudden you're hearing like birds singing and the wind blowing and these sounds of landscape and nature. So I think that's really beautiful, the way it's conceived, that it's in this nestled, as you were saying, in the gallery. So then when people come in, they're looking around, and as we know, most people don't look at everything. Sometimes they'll go watch the video, sometimes they won't, but they're actually hearing it when they're coming in, so they're actually experiencing a bit of it there. And then when they come into the gallery, they're gonna see, and I know this is what Megan has intentionally done, all surrounding the work are the group of 7 paintings. The exhibition itself is not just about landscapes. It goes into the abstract, and that might be in the other room. But the way where my work is right there, so that someone sort of looking away here will see the Lauren Harris, or looking to this side will see, the Varley. And I'm wondering if they will make any kinds of connections with it. And that's what I'm hoping that they do, that they're making that connection. If it's not just about landscape, that maybe they're making that true connection with the group of 7, which was my intention.
Yeah, I think some of us that were at the Spot Talk earlier heard your piece as we were looking at Marion Scott's work. And I know that this is something that Megan and Rebecca and Aaron and myself feel very strongly about, is the connection of contemporary art within dialogue. With contemporary or with historical work and narratives. This is a question to both of you. Really, what do you think that role is of contemporary art in revisiting narratives and questioning history? Really, what is the role of the contemporary artist within that? Gillian, you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I just went and saw the show before this event, and I was really struck at the Jeff Thomas show of how he was doing it with local statues and feeding it back into the political narrative and his own personal history. And I just think, for me anyway, that's the key, that we keep engaging with the questions of the day, because I think the danger is it becomes just this thing you're looking at on a wall and it's kind of flat. So that would be my belief about it.
Yeah, I mean, that is what I strive to do in my art, is to comment on the day we live in and the issues that come up. That's where I get my inspiration from. And I really believe that the present is always influenced by the past. So we're always in dialogue with the past. And I did work in education here at the Ottawa Art Gallery, and I remember when we would do our tours, we would do things, not do things, but we would take this approach inquiry-based. So the idea always that we're questioning, that we're looking at artworks with a question. And so as a contemporary artist, that is our role as well, to constantly create work that is in dialogue with the present, the past, the issues of the day, and presenting in a way that viewers can also add their take on it.